The following excerpt is from the 2020 single Night Train, written and recorded by the rapper Shapo.
My life is on the move. Got the Rari go vroom. In 2017, promised everybody they about to see me real soon.
If you're wondering why you haven't heard of this new hip-hop phenom, it's because Shapo isn't a full-time artist, but instead, of course, is better known as Denis Shapovalov, a swaggering young Canadian tennis star who, as his lyrics say, exploded onto the scene back in 2017. After turning pro that same year, he defeated one of the sport's all-time greats on home soil. At just 18 years old, Shapovalov upset a resurgent Rafael Nadal at the Rogers Cup in Montreal, and in just one match, went from a virtual nobody to a new household name. He ascended through the professional rankings, and for a time, his tennis life indeed appeared to be on the move. With his flashy playing style, big on-court energy, and unabashed pursuit of his musical side passion, Shapovalov had all the makings of a future star with staying power. But flash forward 6 years, and despite some impressive streaks, his career has been far from the success story that many had initially predicted. Instead of winning tournaments, even surviving past the first rounds has proven a challenge for him, now more likely to make headlines for his controversial outbursts on court than for his match wins. At one point considered the flagship star of Canada's new up-and-coming tennis generation, he's since been eclipsed by the rise of more consistent and level-headed peers, while his own standing has essentially remained static. With all his promising talent so far left unfulfilled, and the wider tennis world having more or less forgotten about his initial burst onto the scene after years of disappointing results, the sensational claims in his rap lyrics appear all the more overhyped and exaggerated. Now, you'd be hard-pressed to find him anywhere near the conversation as a contender for the next generation of great male tennis players. So what's happened to Shapo? For someone as naturally gifted in the sport as Denis, it's not surprising that tennis would run in his blood. The son of Russian-Israeli immigrants, his family moved from Tel Aviv to Richmond Hill, Ontario at the dawn of the 2000s, when he was less than a year old. Shapo's mother, Tessa, a former player in the Soviet Union, worked as a tennis instructor and began training him at age 5, later founding her own tennis club in the Greater Toronto area to help fund and advance her son's athletic development. Coming of age as a player in an industrial warehouse converted into an indoor tennis court, Shapo recalls the walls being so close to the lines that, without ample swinging space, he was practically forced to take the ball early. These particular training conditions, and his mother's encouragement of his trademark aggressive style of play, molded the young left-handed Canadian player into a dominant presence on the national junior circuit. With his overwhelming serve, powerful ground strokes, and signature leaping one-handed backhand, Shapovalov blitzed his way to several ITF junior titles and the boys Wimbledon singles title in 2016. But after turning pro the following year, he struck out in the worst and most literal way imaginable. During a 2017 Davis Cup match on home soil, Shapo smashed a ball in frustration that hit chair umpire Arnaud Gabas right in the face, a mistake that led to his immediate default from the match, costing Team Canada a shot at qualifying for the competition's group stage, and later requiring Gabas to receive surgery on his left eye socket. A repentant Shapovalov was forced to pay a $7,000 fine for his error, and his pro career seemed to be getting off to a stumbling start. But his breakout performance just a few months later would soon reverse his reputation from a potential black sheep of the tennis world to a burgeoning star. Offered a wildcard entry into the Rogers Cup, Canada's sole ATP Masters 1000 tournament, the 18-year-old Shapovalov cemented himself as a national icon through just a few matches. Sporting an instantly iconic oversized baseball cap, Shapo swept through his first 2 rounds, and soon met his greatest challenge yet, and in-form Rafael Nadal, who in his 2008 title run at the very same tournament in Montreal, had posed alongside a young Shapovalov in a pre-match photo. Now set to meet again on the same court almost a decade later, Shapovalov claims he glared at a poster of the Spanish star inside the house of his friend and fellow player Felix Auger-Aliassime's house where he was staying, tearing it off on the morning of his fateful match out of a superstitious sense of intimidation. However, later on the biggest stage of his career, in front of a supportive home crowd that included hockey legend Wayne Gretzky, and facing long odds, Shapovalov refused to be fazed. Opting for high-risk offensive play and hitting winners at every opportunity, his bold game plan led to a clutch victory in a third-set tiebreak against the world number 2 Nadal. Toppling a tennis giant, Shapo soared into the top 100 in rankings, drawing widespread praise from the tennis world by becoming the youngest player to advance to a Masters 1000 semifinal. Voted the ATP Star of Tomorrow by the year's end, and showered with athletic accolades in his home country, which for a time had largely been consigned to an afterthought at the highest levels of tennis, Shapovalov seemed poised to become the next big thing in the men's game. So all these years later, why hasn't he? Tennis history is full of untempered young upstarts who displayed plenty of theatrics and attitude alongside raw talent, but who still went on to become the sport's greatest players. And for a time, it seemed like Shapovalov would follow suit. Even John McEnroe admitted that the explosive left-handed Canadian reminded him of himself as a young player. It's not too difficult to see why. Given Shapo's prominent track record of outbursts against officials, from calling chair umpire Carlos Bernardes corrupt for refusing to enforce a time violation penalty on Nadal during their 2022 Australian Open quarterfinal, to telling a rowdy audience in Rome a few months later to shut the f*** up while disputing a line call. To his credit, Shapo's mental composure is a skill he sought to improve, even enlisting the help of a sports psychologist during his 2019 season, arguably the most consistent and successful year of his career so far. Still, his inconsistency has undoubtedly hampered his overall success. Despite achieving a career-high ranking of number 10 in the world in 2020, a string of first-round tournament losses over the past couple of years dropped his ranking to around 30 in the world, where it remained until a season-ending knee injury midway through this past year plummeted him outside the top 100 for the first time since 2017. And for all his ability to play eye-popping tennis, how many titles has he won? Just one. A lowly 250 level event, which he failed to defend despite advancing to the tournament's final just 2 years later. The head-scratching question is, how could a player with so much potential have plateaued? To understand this, take a look at another up-and-coming player, Lloyd Harris, a South African pro ranked well outside the top 100 with a comparatively lower peak ranking, who until just recently held a 3-0 winning record against Shapovalov. How did this happen? Their clash at the 2021 US Open, in which Shapo lost in straight sets after just 2 hours, despite leading by a break in the second and third sets, illustrates many of his common shortcomings as a player. Against a more patient and disciplined opponent like Harris, who was willing to prolong rallies and grind for every point, Shapo's reckless tactics were easily exposed, and with it, the double-edged sword defining his whole tennis career. The same aggressive, high-risk tactics instilled in him during his earliest days of training as a junior player, the playing style that elevated his game and led to his initial success, are the same traits that have held him back the most as his career has progressed. And it all starts with his serve. One of his greatest weapons, but one that's prone to misfiring. He tops the charts in the average number of double faults per match, and it's common for his double fault count to be at least double that of his opponents, often throwing away otherwise winnable games without his opponent even needing to get their racket on the ball. But even when he does get contact with the ball, his impressive range of shot-making skills are often nullified by his constant need to go for broke. During his deep run at Wimbledon in 2021, Shapovalov hit the highest number of winners among the 4 semifinalists, but also the highest number of unforced errors. It reflects his all-or-nothing, or measured abandon approach, where he hits haymakers hoping for winners, an aggressive approach that often results in needless errors. Even when he does put himself in a winning position though, Shapo's struggle to win when it matters the most, as evidenced by the fact that despite making it to 6 singles tournament finals, he's only managed to win a single title to date. Unfortunately for him, as with many young untested players, Shapo often succumbs to high-pressure moments and fails to capitalize. He converts break points and wins tiebreaks less than half the time, while his record in deciding sets and matches is only 50-50. These patterns were all too apparent in his Marathon 2020 US Open quarterfinal against Pablo Carreño Busta, where even with the momentum on his side, Shapo lost after 4 hours and 5 sets. The longer a match proceeds, the likelier he is to falter. A trend that seems symbolic of his larger career trajectory, where he thrived as an early bloomer, only to become stunted when his precocious tennis ability finally met its match. But although he's experienced disappointing results in his solo career by comparison, there is one occasion where the young Canadian's potential has consistently shown through, when he competes for his country. Once known as the birthplace of just a few breakout stars, Canada has spent years on the periphery of high-level professional tennis. Only in the past decade has the unassuming country experienced an unprecedented rise in young tennis talent, culminating in a Grand Slam champion, several Grand Slam finalists, and greater recognition on the worldwide tennis stage, a development that can be traced back to the founding of the country's National Tennis Training Center in 2007. But in contrast to his peers who came of age in this formal, newly established training system, Shapo came to tennis as an outsider from the outset of his career. His initial training under his mother, a formative yet chaotic coaching environment, coupled with his family's financial uncertainty and the sacrifices they had to make to ensure his future prospects without the formal backing of his country's tennis federation, all informed his outsider attitude. For a player who's described his desire to channel wolf energy on the court, the Canadian's lone wolf attitude has certainly defined his approach to his tennis career, perhaps to his great disadvantage. On the contrary, from his breakout junior year in 2015, leading Canada to victory at the Junior Davis Cup, to clinching the US Open boys doubles title alongside his compatriot Felix Auger-Aliassime, Shapovalov has shown that his most consistent and impressive performances have occurred not when he's competing for himself, but rather when he's competing for something larger than himself. Nowhere was this clearer than during his 2022 season, which despite some spotty results for his solo career, was marked by Denis helping Team Canada win 2 maiden titles at esteemed international events. First, at the ATP Cup in Australia in January, and by the year's end, at the 123-year-old Davis Cup, a fitting redemption for the riled kid who had once beamed a chair umpire at the same competition. In the words of Rafael Nadal, after Canada lost its previous Davis Cup final against Spain back in 2019, Denis is special. He has a lot of things that you can't practice. You have it or you don't, and he has it. Of course, Shapo's long-term tennis success, much like that of his country, remains uncertain. He's already proven that he has the potential to beat anyone, fulfilling the promise he made in his Night Train lyrics with his dramatic breakout in 2017, and has the verifiably likable personality and flashy game guaranteed to attract legions of fans and sponsor opportunities. Now at the age of 24, with still potentially over a decade's worth of playing left, only in due time may the tennis world eventually witness Shapo harness his immense talent and win big titles, hopefully sooner than later. Now, you might have considered while watching this video that Denis's career trajectory has somewhat closely resembled that of another explosive upstart I extensively covered in a previous video, Nick Kyrgios, whose wildly divisive attitude and actions, such as his recent acknowledgement that he's considering retirement from the sport, continues to stir intense debate regarding how good he actually is for overall professional tennis representation considering his massive popularity. Here's the thing though, as I alluded to within that video, the reasoning behind Kyrgios' motivations and actions are actually quite nuanced and go far beyond simple headlines. Yet time and again we see media coverage and headlines from different news sources framing situations like these with heavy bias, often dependent on the political lean of that publication, making it difficult even for me to parse truth from fiction when researching these videos. That's why recently I've been using Ground News, the sponsor of today's video, to help me pull back the curtain on media bias in each story I read. Ground News is a website and app that merges articles from different outlets covering the same event into a single story, making it possible to get multiple perspectives in one place. Each story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. As you can see in this story, you can directly compare and contrast related articles from related sources to visually see which details were exaggerated, emphasized, or simply left out. In fact, one of my favorite and coolest features that you just have to check out is the blind spot feed, which highlights stories that are disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. So if you lean left, you might have missed this story, and if you lean right, then you probably missed this one. Ground News is a fantastic tool for sifting through daily misinformation and bias, providing all the tools you need to be a critical thinker, and one I cannot recommend enough. Subscribe to Ground News using my link, ground.news/ColtTennis, to take advantage of their holiday sale. It's their best deal of the year and ends on December 31st. You'll get 40% off the Ground News Vantage subscription, which includes unlimited access to their app, website, and newsletters for just $5 a month. You'll not only add increased clarity to your news reading, but also help support an independent platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.